Hello everyone, welcome to Drinks and Mics, brought to you by Nairametrics. Of course, my name is Ugudre, and we do this every week. Of course, we go live Fridays, 6 p.m. So if you don't have your notifications turned on, you might want to do that. And if you're not subscribing, that's even worse. So you should subscribe to Nairametrics TV and turn on your notification. Well, you know it's worse now.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm super excited today for obvious reasons. One, Tunji Andrews is not here. So I get the whole attention today. Yes. And this is my own turn to give him back what he gave me. Tunji he's not even in Miami. He was summoned by Trump. Yeah. He's going to have a meeting with Putin. If you believe me, they are going to sort out, rare earths and stuff. And to discuss crypto regulation. And his place, in Tunji's place, of course, is my main man, Otumba Del P.
Nice to be back. Nice to be back.
You've been out of circulation for a bit. I don't want us to, let's not say where you've been, but we know he's been living large.
Living the dream.
Otumba, by the way, is part of the Drinks and Mics crew. For a lot of people who don't know, very instrumental to the success of this program. So we do appreciate him a lot.
Definitely.
And good to have him back. You're going to be seeing him very often as well on the show. And of course, I have the fake Otumba. I mean, he wanted to redeem himself, and he went to the...
I did redeem myself.
Yeah, he went to some festival, the Joba Festival, thinking that would suddenly make him Otumba, but we know that it takes a lot to be Otumba,
No, they'll crown him. He's from River State.
Really?
Thank you.
And of course, our special guest today, if you've been following us, is someone that all of us here truly admire. I mean, when you have your own special, celeb, this is our own celeb. And we are super pleased and super proud and honored to have Andrew Ali on set today.
Thank you.
So, of course, be ready for a very, very interesting episode. We're going to be talking a lot about investing, startups. We're going to talk about Africa in general and Nigeria in particular as well. A lot of people want to hear more about Nigeria, but we will always, of course, start with what's happening globally. And interesting, I want to start with you first. We saw a tweet from Elon Musk, and he kind of said, I regret some of my posts about President real Donald Trump last week. They went too far. I mean, you could read several meanings into this tweet, but I just wanted to ask you, does this sort of support the narrative out there that you really can't fight government?
Well, you know what they say, after God is government. Right? And then power and money. Which would you go for, right? I think clearly Elon was in his emotions. Probably I think he overdid some of the things he did. You don't make such pronouncements without coming out with receipts. I mean, it's just not done, right? You need to back it up almost immediately. But I think he's going to find his way to, go back into the good books of Trump, hopefully, because Trump is obviously not someone you want to mess with. So yeah, I mean, I wish him the very best, but. Elon is a funny personality, but I think they fit each other. There's been a lot of tweets and memes that they're couples. I think they're almost like bound to be together. So I think they'll be fine.
Interesting. Let me come to you, sir. So I mean, from super experience in the corporate world, people have often talked about balancing, the tough balance between being trying to run a business and also trying to be in the good books of whichever government that you find yourself in, regardless of your own personal ideology. How should, from your experience, it's right, the younger CEOs that we're seeing now, how do they navigate through these things? Should the ideology be in the forefront of what you do, or should you just, mind your business like investors are telling Elon Musk and leave politics aside?
Well, you have to navigate and find a middle ground between the two. I mean, personally, on the one hand, I think that, if you're doing business, you should be sticking as much as possible to your business. But on the other hand, especially if you're operating in Africa, it's very hard to do that business without getting involved with governments. And if you think back to what I used to do when I was at the AFC, which were big infrastructure projects, those inevitably have a lot of government involved in them. And, if you're going to operate, you have to work with whichever government you choose to operate. But on the other hand, I do think and I do believe that, business people also need to have a certain ethical compass. And, there are lines that you should not cross. And, I wouldn't even try to suggest what those lines should be, because I think each person's ethics are different. But, frankly, I think in dealing with governments, there are some that you probably shouldn't be dealing with. There are some situations you probably shouldn't be getting involved with. And, if you seem to be getting to that point, you should back off. I mean, I've just read a very interesting trilogy called the Third Reich trilogy, which is about the sort of history of the Third Reich and the Nazis from when they started
World War II,
just
before World War II.
Actually, the books, it's a trilogy, very big books. They start in the 1800s when Germany actually became a country and go to about 46, 47, the aftermath of the Second World War. But the interesting thing is, that's relevant to this is the companies that were making the crematoria for the concentration camps, the companies that were supplying Zyklon B, they knew what those things were for. And, they were actively, I can't remember the name of the company, but the company that made the crematoria, I think they were, they started in sort of doing crematoria for animals, so when horses die and things, how do you get rid of them? And, they came and they said, okay, well, maybe you can help us in this concentration camp. And, the guys went there and visited them and suggested ways that they could make it, the process more efficient. Clearly, that goes beyond, at least in my view, that goes beyond, any line you want to say. And so, I think that on the one hand, yes, you have to tread a path. And, if you're doing business, you have to do business. But I think at some level, there's some point where things go beyond, making money. I mean, I cited this because I think it's a very unarguable
I agree, 100%.
Example. And it makes a point very clearly. But, there's a line, and that line can be fuzzy at times, but you shouldn't cross it.
I was wondering. Let me just quick. I was wondering. Obviously, there's a lot that's happened between Harvard, Harvard and the U.S.
Respect. Oh, okay. He wanted to open it up. There's house rules. He knows.
So I was going to say, there's a lot that's happened between Harvard and the U.S. government, right? And then, for me, I also looked at how a lot of companies, even really big companies, are unwinding the DEI strategy. And I'm saying to them is, we spent so much time saying we're going this path, right? Your leadership said we're going to go DEI. You set up departments, and then the government is coughing and they're just kind of winding down all of these programs. And it's almost like, what was your value? What were your values or intrinsic values in the company when you went down that path? Was it just a case where we're just singing to the gallery, or a case where we actually truly believed in these initiatives? But it would be nice to just sort of hear your thoughts around, how Harvard is positioning Trump, and obviously all these global companies who've sort of just moved away from this DEI strategy.
So I think in terms of that, the interesting thing is really to look at the companies that have continued with their DEI strategies. Despite what is going on, because they are the one. Every company said, "Oh, we believe in equal opportunities," blah blah blah. But some companies clearly were just doing that for FaceTime, and as soon as they got the quote unquote permission not to do it, they quickly dumped it. So clearly they didn't believe in it in the first place, and really didn't believe what they were saying. Then there are other companies that may have felt that their arms were twisted, and like I think you can't do like U.S. government contracts if you have DEI. But then there are other companies. I think Walmart was one of them. I can't quite remember.
Apple also voted to
You
keep
said,
it.
look, we actually really believe in this stuff, and we're going to continue, and we believe that it adds value. And it's not all the kind of just corporate BS that a lot of corporations spew because it's fashionable, but that they don't really believe in. So for me, I think that's those are the ones that we should really look up to, because if you're doing things like that, you really need to believe in it. And to be frank, if you don't believe in it, then you shouldn't waste everybody's time doing it. As for Harvard, I mean, I think that's a very difficult and interesting thing. I mean, it seems like, and there are various reports that there was a degree of anti-Semitism on campus. So on the one hand, on the other hand, of course, I think where they were now being asked to go, which was almost to implement a kind of MAGA DEI and effectively go in the opposite direction, and to start taking kind of instructions from the government, I think was also too far. And they're in a very difficult position because of that. To some extent, what you were saying about Elon Musk, that government versus someone, it's hard it's hard to win if you're not the government. So we'll see where it goes out. But I think it's in the long term, it's a devil's alternative for them. They're between the devil and the deep blue sea. There's no response that they can take that's going to be like pain-free. But I think that as a university and as a place of learning, where ironically freedom of expression is needed, if you're seen to become too much of the sort of whatever mouthpiece of whatever is in fashion with the government today, then you will pay the price in the long term. I mean, obviously, the wider question is, what is this doing? I mean, America's dominance has been very much driven, especially in the last few decades, but you can argue for a long time, has been driven by its technological and scientific advantage, and also in other fields as well. And and also its ability to pull in the best people in the world. I was fortunate enough to be in MIT in April, where I was doing an AI course. And, as we had every lecture, the person who was giving us the talk would show what they're doing in research and who their research team was. And, a lot of them had, Chinese names, Indian names, Russian names. There was some...
Wow, Russian names.
Yeah. Russian names could be from Ukraine, could be from wherever.
Yeah, Belarus.
Russian-sounding names. European names. So actually, funny, a lot of French people,
No
German
African?
people. The odd African, sadly, sadly, not so many, but one or two. And actually, sort of, there were white American people, but, I would say that they were in the minority. So the point being that, they've pulled in the best in the world in these particular fields, and the best in the world is not entirely, Native American. And therefore, if they start to chip away at that, it will disadvantage them in the long term. The problem with education and research and all that is that what you are doing today is going to have an impact 20 years
20 years from
later.
now. Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
something that's
It's not
going to
now.
happen in 6 months. So, you won't see any impacts, or you won't see many impacts other than whatever happens to student numbers. But you won't see any sort of strategic impacts for a while. But if this kind of thing continues, if you kind of discourage the best people in the world, it will definitely impact your ability to remain competitive or
In
to
future.
be the sort of hyperpower in the future.
I'm a proud alumnus, so we're building principled leadership.
So, I wanted to ask you, it's kind of going back to, it combines the whole Elon Musk, Donald Trump situation and the Third Reich story that you told, and also goes into your experience as well when you were CEO of the AFC. You talked about the businesses and the Third Reich, the story. That made the crematorium and made the Cyclone B. Do you think that does it say, or do you think that there was some sort of pressure they were under? Because you said they were aware of what they were doing. And do you think they felt like they had to do what they had to do? And then going into your experience, because if you go against the government,
Sorry, just to piggyback on Arnold's question as well, and also like particularly for an AFC that had to deal with multiple governments and multiple regulations, how then do you actually navigate these things, right? So let me give you the classic example. We now have an Africa that was probably a little bit different from, maybe 5-6 years ago, where you have governments now that are, military, some that are trying to pull off, ECOWAS or some of these unions or that we've had, or these blocks that we've created over the years. So you're basically trying to, as a CEO, trying to, fund investment across these countries. Then you have to deal with multiple governments. There's got to be a way around dealing with these people and still looking neutral, isn't it?
So to go back to the Third Reich question first, and I'll come to yours in a second. No, they were not compelled to do it.
Okay.
They did it quite willingly.
Okay.
They were making profits from it. Of course, the company that was doing the crematoria, they, as I said, there was some small company in the middle of Germany, making crematoria for horses. All of a sudden, they had to make crematoria, kind of maybe not entirely accurate, but crematoria that, burnt several million people. You can imagine what that did for their profitability. And to be frank, I guess if they, there were probably other people that they could have approached. So, no. I'll tell you something else. There's another book, sort of that era is something I'm interested in. There's another book I read called Ordinary Men, which is a book about the death squads that followed. So when they, like, for example, invaded Poland, when they invaded Russia,
Still within World War II as well.
Yes, still within World War II. They had these SS death squads that sort of followed the invading army and sort of basically looked for Jews, communists, particularly political commissars, and basically people they didn't like, and massacred them. Now, the interesting thing about this was, one, that these, as the name of the book suggests, these were just ordinary people. They weren't like kind of murderous psychopaths. But relevant to the question that was asked was the fact that, the people who said, I can't do, they didn't get any punishment. You'd have thought that they would have been killed, but no, they didn't even get any
So they weren't
sanction.
compelled to. It wasn't like it was any-
So there's an episode in the book where it's actually quite strange, but where the leader of one of these things came and said, look, okay, sorry guys, but today because I think initially they were killing mostly men, and I think if I recall correctly, I read this a long time ago, but he came out and said, look, that oh, today we've been ordered to kill women and children too. So I know it's tough. And if any of you aren't up to it, please feel free to drop out. And I think only one or two dropped out, but those one or two that dropped out were fine.
Yeah.
I think it's very funny, but I think one or two kind of didn't drop out because they felt that they would not be, how do I put it? They would be sort of imposing the burden of killing these women and children on their other colleagues. So, So the psychology of human beings in these situations is can be very strange. But the point I'm making is that even in those circumstances, not to mention the people who are supplying the chemicals and everything, there wasn't really any compulsion to it. Look, it's not such a difficult thing in when you're looking at AFC and those kind of jobs. To be frank, most of the countries that you wouldn't want to do business in for those kind of reasons tend to be sanctioned anyway, so you can't do business in them even if you wanted to. And then you're also looking at things through a lens of, okay, is this country, if you're talking about an infrastructure project, there would be many commitments from the country. So you'd be like, well, are they good for these commitments over the next 20 years? And, because that's how long these projects last. So again, you would, typically the sort of countries that you wouldn't want to do business in are also the sorts of countries that, probably aren't going to stick to their agreements for the next 20 years. Also, building a power station or a bridge or something is not quite the same as building crematoria for the Holocaust or something. So you don't necessarily have such a moral dilemma in terms of whether you want to do the project. In terms of compulsion to do the projects, again, at the end of the day, you have your organization, you have your balance sheet. In the case of AFC, you have your credit rating. And quite honestly, if you don't think that the project is going to work, then you don't do it, and you find a graceful way of telling people. And as somebody who has been doing investments, since the mid-90s in Africa and more generally, I think one of the skills as an investor is actually saying no to people, because you actually say no to far more investments than you actually say yes to. And there have been a couple of occasions where, and I think, if I can say, I think it's a skill that I developed, I don't know how, but quite well, because there have been a couple of occasions where, say, I've been walking through the airport and someone has run up to me and said, "Oh, hi, how are you?" I'm looking at him and says, "Oh, you won't remember me, but I brought this project to you when you were at IFC and you rejected me, but the advice you gave me and what you said, it really helped, and so thank you." And that's actually happened a couple of times. I mean, I'm sure there are people who, really resent that I tell them that as well, but they don't come up to say hello in airports. So I mean, I think if you're a successful investor, you actually, part of being a successful investor is that you actually learn how to say no to people in a way that doesn't offend them too much. So.
We're going to close this subject pretty soon before we segue. I wanted to also get your viewpoint on a lot of companies in Nigeria now that seem to be multinationals, right? I think we've spoken about them a few times on this show. We've got, let's say, it's Dangote Cement across Africa. There's UBA across. There's First Bank. There's even Florida Wave. There's Zenith. So we're seeing a lot of Nigerian companies essentially move offshore or outside our shores and expanding. And some of these guys also listen or probably watch, our podcast. Just for those that are probably listening, how do they navigate through some of these challenges as well? The experience, I mean, it's different when, I guess, you're an AFC where you're an African-owned institution, you're writing a check. Well, these guys are basically trying to do business, and then you have to go through a lot of regulatory, challenges, country risk, but you gotta expand. And capital at the end of the day is always chasing profits, isn't it? So for a lot of Nigerian businesses that we're seeing, juxtapose this again with something that I've also heard, the fact that the number of books that have been written about it now, deglobalization. People are saying, like maybe this whole globalization talk is probably just a farce, just the way DEI, people are beginning to water down DEI now. They are saying, look, globalization is just not working because we're now seeing countries, we're probably now in an era where a lot of countries are trying to jealously guard their borders, guard their companies, and all that. So in the wake of this, should Nigerian companies be cautious about expanding, or should we just keep going?
Well, there are about 3 or 4 points in that statement. The first thing is that I would challenge your assertion that globalization is dying.
I don't think it is, but that's what I've seen.
If you actually look at people are talking about that, and obviously we've got the whole tariff thing and whatever. But actually, if you look at the underlying numbers, world trade has actually been growing and continues to grow. I mean, I don't know what the future holds, so I can't say that it will continue. But at the end of the day, globalization does have huge benefits, and people will continue to seek those benefits. Yeah, sure. If the tariff war gets out of hand, that might reverse things. There may be certain sectors where people become a bit more nativist because of they see it as strategic or what have you. But really, I think globalization. So it will change its character, and it won't be necessarily quite as open and quite as sung about as it was in its heyday. But I think companies will still do it. I mean, you look at again with the tariffs. Okay, Trump puts a tariff on China. Apple doesn't say, "Oh, let's go and open a plant in Mississippi." They want to open a plant in India, right?
Vietnam.
A lot of people are running to Vietnam. So yeah. So that's one thing. Secondly, look, I've invested across Africa, and I can tell you that actually Nigeria is one of the most difficult countries to do business in.
Wow.
And therefore, if you can do business in Nigeria, you can do business in most other places. So quite honestly, I actually think it's a great thing that these companies are expanding across Africa. As companies, you need scale, you need diversification, etc. And I honestly don't think that it's like a real problem. Yeah, of course, you will have issues that come up day to day in different countries at different times. But overall, I think, as I said, if you've been operating successfully in Nigeria, well, I'm generalizing, of course, but if you've been operating successfully in Nigeria, you can probably handle whatever most other countries can throw at you. And by the way, I mean, those countries typically and there are exceptions, right? But those countries, typically value the investment. So you talked about Dangote, right? So how many Western cement companies are going to build a big cement plant costing hundreds of millions of dollars in DRC, right? Who is in Zambia? Who's investing in those countries except for the minerals, which they typically just want to take straight out and not add any value. These are valuable things, and $200-300 million, which used to be the cost of a cement plant. I haven't done one recently, so I don't know what they cost nowadays. And that's kind of like the entry level, right? Not even like the Obajana type level. How many people are investing that in Zambia or in wherever, other than in a mine? So yeah, we shouldn't underestimate the value add that these guys are bringing to those countries as well.
I think you've also been involved in some of this expansion by virtue of some of the businesses that you're currently in. Any specific encounters or challenges that you're having compared to Nigeria, just as Andrea said?
I was going to say that when we think about even Nigerian companies going to other countries, how many Nigerian companies have actually been able to be impactful? So I'll use Nigerian banks as an example. We haven't had Nigerian banks have gone to East Africa, but they haven't been successful.
Are you sure?
Yeah, absolutely.
there was a recent. I know one of the analysts at Nigerian did a recent story on.
Yeah, you can go look at the financials, right?
Over almost 2 trillion. That's what we made from Pan-African operations.
Yeah, but it's still very small compared to the actual leaders in. So actually, one funny thing was, I know it was on that group chat where there was this tech company that was going to East Africa, and this East Africa guy said, I wish them the very best. Exactly.
Of course.
That there's been a lot of dead bodies of Nigerian banks who have gone to East Africa and just haven't cracked it.
So what's so difficult what's the problem with East Africa? Is it the purchasing power?
I think as well is you have to also build a business where it's run by the locals, right? I think a lot of the time we go to certain countries and say we want to take the Nigeria way of doing things to those countries, and it probably necessarily doesn't work, right? Because you also have to get the cost of the product fit for the market. What works in Nigeria might not necessarily work. It's almost how we talked about Momo, how Momo was successful in Ghana, but it's come to Lagos or Nigeria, it's not particularly successful because financial inclusion has already happened here. We just don't recognize it as we think it's going to be M-Pesa, it's going to be Momo, but you have the Flutter Waves who are doing the POS. That is our financial inclusion. That's already happened. So when you're trying to bring SMS solution to this market, not that it wouldn't work, but you're not going to get the kind of scale that you are anticipating.
Just to play devil's advocate for you, some banks have been successful in other countries like Ghana, for example, right? Zenith Bank, Ghana, Access Bank, and other countries.
So I would argue that the journey of Nigerian banks to sort of Francophone and West Africa has been successful.
Is it a culture fit thing, do you think? Is the West African culture different from East African culture? I think
there's some level of difference. But I'm saying when you look at the bank's books, the journey to East Africa has not been as successful as the journey.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say
Africa.
that. I don't follow the banks quite as closely as I used to, but definitely in West Africa, they have definitely been, one, successful, and two, actually shaken up the market. So even if they haven't, I don't know what the market shares and things are, but a lot of the banks were, like if you take Ghana, for example, a lot of the banks were actually very sleepy and what have you. And then, the Nigerian bank showed up and, relationship managers would actually come to your office rather than demanding you go to the bank and all that kind of thing. And that actually affected the culture, of banks more generally. So East Africa, I don't really know so much. I do also remember, though, that UBA, there was a point a long time ago when there were many countries and people were kind of questioning what what that strategy was, because they were making so much money, so little money
Getting out of
those countries. But, it took a while, but eventually I think now they make whatever it is, 30% of their profits.
69 actually.
Well,
their pre-tax profit.
a big chunk of that is coming from West Africa.
69.
No, sure.
I mean, we have the figures here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So now they're making. Part
Cote
of that's
d'Ivoire,
probably to do
Exactly
with the naira falling, of course. But yeah. So now it's a significant part of their profits. I think similar, although not such a big thing with GTB, and I'm sure we'll see the other guys. Where that's coming from, I don't know. I don't have those breakdowns. But I would also say that. Part of it is probably also just a question of time, and they went into the West African countries much earlier. And I think it takes a lot longer to build up a business than people think. AFC. It was a 10-year journey, and I think by the time I left, we were kind of only just getting started in a way. And so again, I don't know, but it could also be a question of time as well. And just as you say, you have to, you come with your own things, but you kind of have to understand the market. You have to adopt your products. To be frank, a lot of Nigeria is, corporate banking is driven by the need for FX. If you go to Kenya, they basically have an open FX market. You can just, it's kind of freely floating, and you can just go and buy FX. So all the kind of businesses
that
around
we do here,
sourcing FX, getting FX, transferring FX, don't really exist there, and therefore, if you come with that as one of your profitability drivers in your corporate banking, it's not going to work in Kenya, for example. So, it may be a bit too early to tell, really.
Interesting thing is that, I was checking the numbers, and from the analysis we did, UBA did 556 billion Pan-Africa, outside Nigeria, including UK and US. That was about 69% of his pre-tax profit. Access Bank was next, about 460 billion. That was 50-something% of its profit. Then we had GTCO, 273 billion, made the whole of last year. I think that's about 21% of service profit. And the Fugals, of course, we have the First Bank actually, which was about 219 billion as well, 27 or so percent. And then of course we have the rest as well. So it kind of looks like the Fugas.
So again, the currency going east, going west, exactly. So
that's
at
the end of the day,
part.
probably.
Ivory Coast and Ivory Coast
It's expected exactly.
So from the Euro now.
But isn't that the whole idea?
Well,
anyways?
Exactly. Doesn't that validate their strategy?
It validates the argument you're making, which is why I said
That's why
that journey to West Africa has been very successful, from Ghana all the way to Cote d'Ivoire. It's been a different case when Nigerian banks go to Kenya. We just haven't been able to become a top 5 or top 3 bank there. There's still a long journey to go, because again, you have to be able to, you have to want to lend.
Yes.
In Kenya, you have to want to, because the average Kenyan guy is maybe earning his salary on a daily basis. He maybe earns 20 M-Pesa, right? Or maybe he gets paid tomorrow.
Shillings.
He wants to, shillings, and he wants to drink beer tonight. So he goes on his app and he borrows money for one beer, knowing that tomorrow when his paycheck comes, he will pay back that one beer. And that's really the culture over there. Right now, if you come with Nigerian banks, don't even typically want to lend. So if you're going to Kenya and you're not able to adapt to and put a product that fits that market, you can't get the kind of scale that you're essentially looking for. So what you tend to see is people are just driving corporate banking, corporate investment banking in those places, are not necessarily the retail market.
All right, it'll be interesting to see how far a lot of Nigerian companies do well as they essentially continue to expand beyond Africa. We're going to segue now into investments. I think since you left AFC, one of the things you've been doing very successfully, of course, is investing in a lot of Nigerian businesses on your personal capacity as well. It'd be interesting to just know from your experience what that has been like. We had someone here, I think 2 episodes ago or so, who also gave a bit of insight. I think Shirombo, sure you probably know him as well. Just be interesting to know what your insights has been like, what your experience has been like, investing in Nigerian startups and even probably mature companies. Anyways, yeah.
To piggyback on that, you mentioned one of the skills of successful investors is the ability to say no.
Yeah.
But you also said that there's some no's that have come up to you to say thank you for saying no because I've learned. But I want to know, I'm sure the audience would like to know, and everyone would like to know, are there any no's that you regret that you think I should have?
Mm-hmm. No.
Okay.
Oh my God. That's so funny.
And the reason is not, there are things I've said no to that if I had not said no to, I would have made a nice chunk of money on. But I don't regret them because, I tend to look at decision making as a process.
Okay.
And, if you follow your process, the things I regret are where I didn't follow whatever process I have for these things. And, and then make an investment and it either doesn't work or, whatever. Right. But where I follow my process and I think, okay, this doesn't work for me, and I don't invest, and then it turns out that okay, maybe if I'd invested, I'd have made 5-6 times my money. Well, that's life, and it's just like if you're investing in the stock market, some of the things you invest in will go down, some will go up. As long as overall you make a positive return, you're okay. And I think if you're beating yourself up about, oh yeah, I should have invested in this or that, so yeah, there are definitely things that I saw that if I had invested in, I'd have made a ton of money on, and I said no. But I don't regret them in that sense. Overall, I think that obviously, my main purpose is to make money when I invest, right? So I'm not investing to lose money. But to be frank, I think, and again with 2020 hindsight, if I just bought Google on their IPO and held it, I probably would have done better than my investments. I've made a good Google has done very, very well. That's why I said with 2020 hindsight, right?
But Google would have been like maybe 99 or...
Yeah, I'm not talking about Google like 5 years or 6 years ago. I'm talking about, IPO or more recently NVIDIA or something like that, right? Obviously you've got to, that's assuming you're picking the right winners. So, if you talk about, versus the S&P 500, then maybe I've done better than that on my investments, as a whole, my private investments. But why I say this is that actually, I think one of the things that, especially as I've kind of gotten older myself, one of the things that I like to do is really to support kind of young people. I think that young people across Africa really are our biggest asset, actually. Or our people are our biggest asset. And since we've got more young people than any other kind of cadre, it kind of comes to young people and sort of helping them kind of develop, helping them plug into kind of the global economy, is also something that I'm interested in. technology. You know, my first degree was actually in electronics and electrical engineering. So even though I veered off into finance, I kind of, you know, found my way back home in terms of, you know, supporting technology companies. And again, I think that developing technology, IP, etc., in Africa is something that's important. So for me, it's more than just purely sort of investing for the money. And as I said, yeah, maybe I wouldn't have made as much money, or maybe I'd have made more. I haven't really done the numbers investing in the S&P 500, but certainly it would have been sort of less work, less stress. You know, just put the money there and go to sleep and, you know, collect the dividend. But yeah, you know, and I do that with a lot of my portfolio, I should say. You know, so what I invest in this is a smaller part of that portfolio. But you know, supporting people. You know, the first like private investment I made, and I was doing this when I was still, you know, working. I mean, the first private investment I made was supporting a former colleague of mine. Was that the first? Well, one of the first anyway. You know, who was setting up his own business, and is gone from there. So yeah,
And that went really well.
Went okay. Went okay.
So there was one of these episodes where Arnold told a famous story about some investment that he had that went sideways, right? Even one of our guests as well, Sam, also, you know, told that sort of story. Are there stories like that you have, probably investments, and you're like, I know you said you don't regret the ones that you don't invest in, but what about the ones that you probably invested in?
Well, you know, as I said,
sideways?
you know, so look, I mean, frankly, if you invest in startups, right, you're going to lose money on most of your investments. And if you, you know, if you can't lose money, and you know, I mean, as the old sort of VC saw goes, you know, you kind of, it's like the top one or two performers that make the fund, really, or the top, you know, 5 or 10%, let's say, that make the fund. You know, maybe 30% kind of make the money back, you know, but don't really, and then 50% or something you just completely write off. So the ones I regret out of those are the ones that, you know, where there was some red flag, which, so it's kind of like the opposite of what I said. So it's where I didn't follow my process. So there was some red flag or something that I should have paid attention to. But I still went ahead and invested because, you know, I loved some part of it. You know, I mean, if you look at Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, I think those guys were the epitome of it. But, you know, the less emotion you bring into investing, the better your results. And so when you fall in love with things, that's like the worst. That's the worst thing. So I find that, and you know, I mean, we're talking about startup type of investments, but if I extrapolate to, you know, because really everything I've been doing for the last, I don't know what, 25, 30 years has been investing, right? So I find that really the most important thing is really who the sponsor is, or in startup terms, who the founder is. And depending on which type of company, it's you know, what qualities you're looking for will differ. But you know, there was a point in time where we did when I was at the AFC at the time, and we did an analysis of our, let's say, underperforming investments, and literally 95% of them had some sort of governance issue there. So governance is like a major thing. And you know, how people steward your investments are a major thing, you know. So I mean, I think I think probably I didn't. Sadly, I didn't watch the episode with Olumide, but I suspect that we probably, one of our war stories is probably the same investment.
You had some though.
And I think when you invest money and people just fritter it away, that's really, to me, really the sort of,
But how do you pick a company though? Sorry, I wanted to ask you. How do you decide, like, okay, this is, beyond, I mean, I know you said you look at the person as well, the founder, but beyond that, what do you look at, especially Nigerian startups?
So you look at the founder, you look at the founder's track record. So, frankly, if they've done it before, even if they didn't.
Are there many of them like that perhaps have track records? Mm-hmm.
There are a few. I mean, I was going to say, even if they haven't succeeded. So when you think of track records, you're probably thinking of those who have succeeded. But I'm thinking like, okay, if you've done it before, even if you didn't succeed, right? But, if you didn't succeed for good reasons and you treated your investors well in that not succeeding, then that's fine for me. In fact, that's a positive, as long as you learn from that. And I have, I've invested in something, lost all my money, and still invested in the next thing that the founder started because of the way they dealt with it. Because when you're investing in these things, you know that you're investing in a hypothesis, right? If you're investing in, if you're buying shares in Dangote Cement or Access Bank, that's one thing. You're investing in a story, in something tangible, as it were. But if somebody comes and says, oh, I'm going to develop an app to lend money to pregnant women, so that they can, go for antenatal clinic or whatever, it's a hypothesis, really. And that hypothesis may not prove to be correct. But it's how the people do that. So I think the track record is important. I think the stewardship is important. That's much more difficult to assess. But again, you're giving them money. You're not giving them money to go and fly in a private jet or marry a wife or japa or whatever, So you want to try and assess that. You notice that in some ways the idea, I haven't mentioned the idea yet, right? Because, which probably is the next thing. So it's the idea. And really the idea is how is there really a market? Is there really a problem? Are people really going to pay to have this problem solved? So those are some of the things you're thinking about. And then, their kind of ability to execute on that, I think, which is slightly different from who they are. And then to some extent, how there's a philosophical thing about being a hedgehog or a fox, right? And and a hedgehog is something that just goes straight and is always fixed on one objective, and a fox is like bouncing around. I think it was one of these philosophers, in Berlin, who wrote about that. It's sort of what your combination is, because, the other point is that whatever business they propose to you on day one is not going to be what the final business
it always
is.
evolves.
Okay.
So, can they manage, keeping their eye on the price, so not just going kind of 360 or 180 degrees away, but also having the flexibility to, adapt to the circumstances. So those are some of the things that...
So let me ask you, I asked Olumide this question and he had an interesting answer. I was, before we had Olumide, I was with a VC investor who said to me he doesn't necessarily invest in founders, but he likes founders that are happy to leave the business and not become CEOs. But Illumide said something along the lines of he'd rather invest in the founder. So I just wanted to ask your view on that, whether that matters to you. So what I got from the VC investor was when the business gets to a stage, he wants a founder that's happy to step back and hire a CEO to run the business to the next level.
I also read that as well.
Is that your view as well, or do you?
So I don't have a religion on that, but
Okay.
I do think that I've seen it so many times, and not just in the kind of VC world,
Okay.
where people start something off, and it kind of gets beyond their capabilities, one way or the other, and being able to have this kind of self-awareness that, okay, maybe this isn't, maybe I'm kind of I'm getting in above my head on this,
Okay.
etc. Is important. And again, it somewhat comes to emotion, so a lot of, and especially frankly in Africa, there's so much, emotion and whatever the word is tied up in, I'm the CEO, I'm this, I'm that. And some people, have that capability and can see the thing through. But, to be frank, if you are a 20-year-old who's just graduated in, computer science from UI or somewhere, you've got a startup, successful, what do you know about, HR processes, about financial management, about governance, you're whizzy tech person. And you've come up with this idea, you've spotted a problem, great. But are you really the best person to be leading a now business that's doing $100 million in revenue or whatever it is? Now, maybe the answer is yes. So the answer is not automatically no, but it's not also a given that because you spotted that. Going back to my thing, there's a market for pregnant women who want to borrow money, for antenatal, and you build an app for that. There's nothing that says that, just because you did that and you stumbled on $1 billion market, that necessarily you're the best person at HR and all those things. And, we've seen many of these companies blow up, or at least have issues for those reasons. But the flip is also true that, there are some people who can do it or who can grow into it. So, if you look at Zuckerberg, for example,
True. Yeah.
he is one. But if you look at the guys who founded Google, on the flip side, they started the business. It kind of, went ballistic. They brought in, but even Zuckerberg, I should say,
Yes.
when the thing went, he brought in Sheryl Sandberg,
Yes,
right?
yes,
so he had at least a self-awareness to know
He
that.
also had this guy, what's that chap? But go on though, he had this chap that guided him.
So he had the self-awareness to know that he needed help. Now, he stayed as the CEO, but he kind of brought Cheryl in. Sergey and what's the other guy? Google founder. Sorry, name has slipped my mind.
Sergey Brin and what's his name as well?
Anyway, they kind of stepped aside and brought in Eric Schmidt as the CEO. So there are different models for this. But Larry Page, thank you. And so there are different models for it. But I think that, having that kind of maturity, if you like, and self-awareness to think, okay, I can't be the be-all and end-all of this thing. And figuring out the appropriate way to deal with that. And as we've discussed, there are different models. I think is important, and that goes back to the personality. You need an odd combination of, on the one hand, like supreme self-confidence, but on the other hand, humility as well. And it's a hard combination to find.
I mean, very interesting. Even Mark was talking recently. I read it somewhere where he said he actually hates managing people. So he has 20 lieutenants in the business. Those are the only people that he interfaces with, but they should be able to go and run their divisions by themselves. And that also speaks to what I think is your leadership signature. Because it's very important, I think, in organizations to build culture in a way that makes sense. If you hired a 20-year-old who's been an entrepreneur from day one, he doesn't understand what it is to hire a married man who has a wife, who has kids, and realizes that he needs
paternity leave.
Yeah, he needs paternity leave. He needs healthcare.
Yeah.
People want pensions paid. People want life insurance paid. They want. These things are things that for an average entrepreneur, they fly over your head because you're young, you're healthy, you don't fall sick, you don't go to the hospital.
And you're focused on the product.
Yeah, just focus more on that execution, but you forget that there's a human side to
everything,
to building an organization. And then you might need to then find someone who would then be the promoter of culture, building culture within the organization, and being humble enough to say, you know what, I don't know this thing. You run with it. I would focus on, the product side of things or the tech side of things.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Interesting. Let's segue a bit into different other types of investments as well. I think, at least I know Arnold and I are still very much interested in Nigerian equities. I know Otumba here is done. He's tired of Nigerian equities. You are giving the mic now, he'll go on and on and on and on and on and complain. Just interested to know, because I've heard you talk about, foreign stock portfolio that you've had and also startups. But what about Nigerian equities market? Is it anything there interests you or anything that you would like to see done better?
So funnily enough, I was just talking to someone earlier today about opportunities in the market. I think oh my gosh, it's almost 10 years ago now. But, when I saw the way the economy was heading sort of 9-10 years ago, I kind of divested 2014, 15. Yeah, I kind of, basically exited Naira as much as I could. That I think has paid quite well, to be honest. I think with the recent devaluation, there are opportunities
to come back in.
However, I'm not sure those are. I'm not convinced yet that those are long-term opportunities. They're more tactical opportunities. And why do I say this? I think that, and I should say that personally, I am more of a buy and hold type of investor rather than a trader. So I'm not looking at the share price every day. I'm not following the news. I want to find quality companies that I can,
go to bed with.
Yeah, invest, maybe 6 months later, go and look at it and see what the portfolio is doing. So I'm looking at it from that particular lens. Not from the lens of, being an active trader and everything. But, I would say two things. So I don't know if he wants me to mention his name, so I won't mention his name. But there's somebody who has done a calculation that, if you go back to when the Naira was created, which was in 73, and you had a dollar and you had a Naira and you just put the dollar under your pillow, right? That the Naira would basically have had to earn 16% per annum compounded to be worth the same as our $1 today. right?
Wow.
So, you know, I mean,
Makes sense.
That is
That's
a
just
Says a
crazy.
lot. Yeah, says a lot.
The second data point I would make is that while you can find individual stocks, if you look over the, and I mean, I'm talking about sort of maybe before this big massive devaluations. I'm not sure if they exist now, but you know, in the past you could find 5 or 6 stocks in the market that, yes, if you'd bought them, Presco was one, I think GTB was one at some point. That if you'd bought them 10 years ago, they would have beaten devaluation, they'd have beaten inflation, etc. However, how are you going to know in advance to pick those 5 stocks, right? Or 6 stocks? Yeah, so if you'd been lucky enough or clever enough to pick them, yeah, you'd have done well. But, how many of us, have that insight? If you look at people who invest in asset classes, pension funds, for example, none of them have beaten inflation. I have a Pencom pension, and
it's just
and I mean, yeah, let's just say that. I mean, when I turned 50, luckily when I left AFC, I was over 50, and I basically met the criteria for cashing it in. So I cashed it in. And they paid me a lump sum, which was fine, and then but you can't collect the whole pool. Some of it has to be paid as a pension. Now, I mean, what I got at the time, actually it wasn't that much, but I was able to pay all of my domestic staff with that money, every month. Today, I don't think I can pay one of them
with the monthly
money.
pension.
Yeah. So my point is that, yes, with what has happened recently with the devaluation, I think can argue about it, but the naira is at some fair value-ish kind of level. There are opportunities now. Whether the long-term trends in the Nigerian economy, which is kind of what I've been talking about for the last 5 minutes, have really reversed, I don't know. So you can buy X stock, and there are all kinds of examples, that have gone up 5 times and everything 10 times, maybe even some who've gone up more. In the recent past, and if you held those, you'd have been you'd be smiling. But if you're looking at it on a kind of 10-year basis, I'm not sure that
especially when you dollarize it.
Yeah, I'm not sure that those, even if you don't dollarize it, but you look at it in terms of buying power. Actually, I mean, one of the things is that, again, if you look at a long-term trend, dollarizing and buying power inflation kind of come to the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when you look at, okay, yes, the naira has been devalued, but inflation, even with the new rebased number, is still 24%. So it's still a good 20+% higher than dollar inflation. So in the long term, that's what you'd expect the naira to, fall by. And so, your companies have to be earning that 20% just to stand still, if you're looking at it against the dollar or against purchasing power. And, they have to do this year in, year out. So, yeah, if you're a trader, maybe you can find the one that will do 20% this year. Then you sell that and you buy into the one that's doing 20% next year. But the pension fund managers, the people if I can be frank, who really matter in terms of they need to make a return, I'm not sure that that things have really changed if you look at the long-term trend.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, this sort of goes away from what we're talking about with 6 days in. I wanted to get a view on debts and defaults across the continent and then come back to Nigeria. When you look at, let's say, the past 5 to 10 years, we've seen Zambia defaults, we've seen Ethiopia, we've seen Ghana defaults. Ghana felt like the canary in the coal mine, where it's like you realize that, what I mean by that is everyone realized that this country is defaulted, and then a few years later, everything is okay. Do you feel like, where do you think Nigeria sits in this, or should we say, are there any other countries that you think are ready or about to default? And then where do you think and then where do you think Nigeria sits in this on this line?
So I'll answer the second question first, actually. So, there's a lot of debate. There's been a lot of debate about both devaluation and the fuel subsidy removal, right? But I think that if Nigeria had not done those things, we would have been heading towards default in the next couple of years.
Okay.
And default can be done in different ways. So it can be done, by actually defaulting, but it can also be done by inflating and all kinds of things, particularly domestic debt, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So that has definitely staved it off. And you'll notice that, credit rating agencies have noticed this and, have sort of revised their rating. Again, you can argue about the ratings, right? But and I always never remember which agency has which. But the one that we were at CAA. Now, if your credit rating has a C in it, basically your junk is like anything below triple B, right? Or triple B minus. But if your credit rating has a C in it, basically you're in the mortuary. You may not quite be dead, but you're on your way.
Yeah.
And so, the fact that we've been upgraded from CAA to triple B minus or whatever with a positive outlook, I think reflects what I've just said. Now, of course, we continue to have large deficits. And by the way, again, my own view is that it is those deficits and the financing of them that really is the major impetus behind our inflation and therefore behind the Naira devaluation, right? And, all this stuff we get, cost push, demand pull, all those very fancy sounding terms, are kind of meaningless, really. And so, we still have large deficits. I mean, basically, again, we talk about the deficit as a percentage of GDP, which actually hides the fact that, essentially half of what the government is spending is borrowed. When you actually look at it like that, half of what we spend is borrowed, right? Now that, because, the convention is to look at it as a percentage of GDP. You're talking about 5, 6, whatever it is percent. It doesn't sound so bad, but when you think about it in those terms, we've always been over optimistic about how much revenues are going to increase. Now, of course, we're looking at large numbers of revenue increases. In nominal terms, but that's just because inflation has made all prices go up, including the revenue. But I don't know what the what the deficit to GDP percentage is. I think it was about 6% last year. I don't know where it's tracking this year.
They wanted to come below the fiscal allowance that they have. I think about 4%.
Three or so. I mean, I have a very adverse position on this, and I think I have a running bet with Sam on this. I do think that Nigeria will default, and I think we probably will default before 2031.
Why
On which of the
2031?
debt, local or foreign?
What does it really matter?
Oh, it does. No.
I think
Technically, you probably can't default on your local debt,
debt
but on
is-
foreign
local
debt,
debt
I do
almost
think
tanking the
I do think that it's a few things here is, we currently at about 80 plus debt servicing to revenue, right? I do not see how. I just don't see the upside to revenue growth is not something that I see. It would happen, but it's not at the speed at which we are spending.
But why 2031? Sorry, I just want to
I'm just giving sort of the time. I'm just the speed that we're growing debt is not the same. It's not at the same speed that we're growing revenue, and I'm not really sure how we intend to finance all of these things. The truth is, if you look at a Tinubu government, the truth is he likes a big government. That's his philosophy about governance. So I feel like there is no room where they would be thinking about cutting costs, or I feel like we're going to keep pushing the envelope of just either borrowing
he's
more.
big on infrastructure and all
Yeah.
that.
So at some point, I feel like that is going to.
That is if revenues don't go up.
Yeah, I think the risk is high.
Fun fact is, we also did an analysis recently, and it was pretty interesting seeing Nigeria's fiscal deficit over the last 14 years. And we've actually been running fiscal deficit since then. 2024 projected 15 trillion, 2023 13, 2022 9, 2021 6.9, 2020 6.
This is our
No, fiscal deficit.
fiscal deficit. Okay.
This is not even debt. So that just sort of shows you the amount of debt we have been adding to, our public debt profile over the years. And to his point, it's likely going to increase as we pursue infrastructure spending. And that sort of takes us to reforms. We've seen a lot of reforms happen. I think you sort of mentioned the fuel subsidy removal, mentioned and FX reforms. Or while this might not sound like a reform, what we're also saying is perhaps a government that is really big on infrastructure spend and policies that probably could drive that. Some of them would also defend and tell you that, look, they're also trying to do a lot around the oil and gas space, trying to see how we can increase our fiscal buffers through increase, production outputs. Just curious to know what your view is with all of these things. Do they? I mean, like I'm big on infrastructure as well. Probably not as big as Tunji, but I'm big on infrastructure. But debt-funded infrastructure, especially in Africa.
So look, I spent almost my entire professional career investing in infrastructure. So, if there's anybody who believes in infrastructure, it's me. However, I do think that, infrastructure does not generate revenue. Infrastructure only assists other people in generating revenue. So if you invest in infrastructure that doesn't generate, that isn't helping people generate revenue, it's not really doing any good for you. So, and revenue in this sense doesn't necessarily mean actually revenue, but it can also mean sort of societal benefits, which help. So, if you build a train that goes from A to B, but, it only runs once or twice a day, people can't get on it, it's not carrying much cargo, then it's not really, benefiting. And in a country like Nigeria, which is capital constrained, essentially, you want the GDP growth benefit of a particular investment. I mean, because at the end of the day, it's still an investment, right? So you want the GDP growth benefit of that investment, ideally, to be higher than the interest rate you're paying on the debt that you've incurred. And bear in mind that you have an opportunity cost, especially for us, because when it's not like we're overwhelmed with capital. So if you're building railway X or road Y or whatever, you are not doing something. And I mean, to be frank with you personally, I think that human capital development is much more important in today's Nigeria than infrastructure, if you're taking it in generalities. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we don't need electricity, we don't need, transportation, etc. Of course we do. But at the end of the day, right, when you really think about it, your GDP per capita is tied to the productivity of your people. The productivity of your people depends firstly on their skills, secondly on the tools that they use, and thirdly on the markets that they can access. The infrastructure comes under the rubric of tools in a way. The road is allowing somebody to get from A to B, but you need somebody to drive the truck or whatever, right? So when you have record numbers of people out of school, I saw something about adult literacy and by region, and the highest region I think was the Southeast. And that for men, if I recall, was about 74%, and for women was 71%. That's pathetic. I mean, you should be at like 99%, frankly. I mean,
especially in this internet age.
60 years after independence, and people were kind of boasting about that the Southeast, there's people from the Southeast that were kind of more literate than other regions. Fair enough. But I mean, when you're using 74% or 75% to do that, as opposed, places in India, Kerala, which by the way is a communist state in India, has had a 90-something% literacy rate for a long time. I think that is the biggest problem we have. Unfortunately, people don't vote for improving schools. People don't vote for, making sure teachers are well trained. People vote because they see a flyover or a bridge or a railway or something like that, and that seems to be what people like to see. So in a way, politicians deliver what people like to see to some extent. But honestly, I think that human capital development is really where we are. I mean, if you take like Dangote's refinery, which I think is a great thing. I heard that they've imported tens of thousands of people from India to run it, because obviously we don't have the skills in this country to do it. Now, I don't know if that's true, but that's what I've read. It seems plausible at least, and to some extent it's understandable, because we haven't really had a refinery in this country for a very long time, and those 3 or 4 that we keep on hearing get being turned around have been.
They've been trying to come up for years.
In my view, they've been scrap metal for a long time, to be honest. So expecting us to have those skills in country is, would be unreasonable, and therefore, importing them, I think, makes sense. But the point is that, if we had those kind of skills, that would really be a big boost to our economy because all that money and everything that's being paid to them would stay in the country. You'd be on that refinery, and then you'd move to other things and take those skills with you. You would do startups around it, etc. So, and I'm sure that if nothing, I mean, Dangote, I think, is very patriotic anyway, but if nothing, but because of the cost alone, they would, I'm sure, be urgently training Nigerians to take the place of those people. But the fact is that we don't have a system that trains those people, by itself. The people who are doing the project have to train the people. And, you hear about graduates coming out of university and companies essentially having to train them from scratch, because even the quality of what they're learning is not great. So again, I think, I would say human development trumps infrastructure, which is not to say that, you need everything. So you do need infrastructure, but if I was spending money, that's what I would. But as I said earlier, what you do in education, it takes 20 years for the results to come out. If you're on a 4-year election cycle.
I don't even think we need formal education. I think we need to
vocational.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, when I talk about, so the people who are running this refinery, probably they have some level.
I actually saw a lot of Nigerians because I visited the refinery, and that was the first time I actually saw. Sorry to butt in. I actually saw young Nigerians.
That's
people
excellent.
who read chemical engineering in schools. I spoke to some of them, and I was surprised. Like, how did you get? Well, they blocked me from school as I was graduating.
That's excellent.
They've gone to India to go train.
Or they
and
went
all
to
that.
India to train.
Yeah, of course. But that's the point. And I fully agree with you. I mean, we focus too much on academic education, but you guys all work in finance. You know that you do a degree in finance, but you come into a bank or a brokerage or whatever, day one you're useless, right? You actually need to learn the actual skills that are useful for that job. So these guys, they did chemical engineering. And but
probably they still had an experience of a lab before.
Yeah, but they still had to go to India to learn about this. So, I mean, it's great. As I said, I'm sure they'll be training Nigerians,
a lot of them.
And to me, those are the things that really, people talk about the refinery in terms of, it's going to save us FX and all that. I don't think it really will. But
you don't think so?
No.
I like the way you said no.
Why? Sorry, but I'm just wondering why.
Well, it will save a bit of FX, but if you think about it, if you take a barrel of oil, right, and you sell it to the refinery in Naira, then you're not able to sell it abroad for dollars.
Revenue.
So net. Now, what you do gain is the difference between the price of an unrefined barrel and the price of the refined products that you get out of that barrel, which is, I think they call it the refining margin. And that varies actually according to market conditions, but it's sort of 20%, 10 can fall below 10%, go up to 20, 25%. So that's what you're gaining. So you do gain something, but it's not, people are talking about this in the context of, it's going to strengthen the Naira and all that. Definitely that's not going to happen. Or it's not going to cause that. But it has tremendous benefits because of the value added that it brings to the country, because of the complexity of it and this upskilling that people need.
Jobs, ancillary jobs,
because
jobs.
Exactly. And even the people working in the refinery. I mean, how many people had experience of working in refineries, and those are industrial processes, so they can translate into other things. So the benefits of that refinery are humongous, actually, but just not in the way people think.
Yeah. I think it was yesterday we were talking about how the reports that Dangote has procured or purchased about 4,000 trucks, CNG trucks, which would be used to move product across the country. And I think when you put that in perspective, the top 7 downstream players today don't have up to 4,000 trucks. So that's a huge, huge investment that he's making.
So all those downstream things, and then, we talk about it as a refinery and we talk about products, but it's actually a petrochemical plant. So again, it's going to be producing inputs into different industries, which hopefully will reduce their own input costs a bit and make them more competitive. So it has huge benefits, but as I say, it's just not the ones that people think it will have.
All right, so let's we're almost towards the end of the show, but let's talk about some of the bank recapitalization that has happened or that is ongoing. It'd be interesting to hear your views, and the reason why I want to hear your views here is speaking to the folks at the CBN. They typically, or they constantly say, look, we want our banks to be bigger, and so that they can finance so-called $1 trillion economy that the president is looking up to. And so that's why you got to recapitalize banks. We've also got some naysayers, if I want to use that word, who are saying, well, this is probably just trying to clean up banks' books because of a lot of the stuff that has happened over the years, so banks are probably not strong. But let's ignore the naysayers for now and look at, what recapitalization means for Nigerian banks. I remember we talked about, expanding beyond Africa, beyond Nigeria, rather, into other African countries. But as someone who's been at the helm of one of the largest, financial institutions in Africa, what does this mean for us? That we're having banks that are, I guess, stronger than they were several years ago or a few years ago, and funding the so-called credit economy that the president also wants?
Well, I mean, look, so ultimately, you will develop your economy based on, not exclusively with, but based on your own domestic capital. If your own domestic capital is not there, you can't really rely on foreign capital to develop your economy.
I like that, domestic capital.
Yeah. So that's the first point. And I mean, foreign capital is important, but it's not consistent. So, Nigeria becomes flavor of the month. Lots of people pour their money in, then all of a sudden something happens and, they're all out. I mean, when I was at the AFC, for example, I always joke about this. I won't mention the name of the bank, but I had a certain international well-known investment bank come to meet me on at least 3, maybe 4 occasions to say, we're now back in Nigeria and we're fully committed, which obviously means that they left Nigeria 3 times, right?
And they're fully committed 3 times.
And they're fully committed, So I think it's, and I think if you look at it, our banks really, on a global scale, are quite small. They aren't able to finance large projects, and they aren't able to do long tenors, which is really restricts the ability of industries to develop. Also, as we've seen, it's not really a good idea to finance long-term things with dollars, if you're in an economy that has high inflation and what have you. And so I do think that it's a good idea to try and strengthen the banking sector. Now, as far as this current recapitalization goes, whether it will take us to Uhuru, I don't know, but it's certainly, I think, a step actually in the right direction, in my view.
Interesting to hear, because I know,
I think
Dele is one of those.
So I think it's a positive thing, right? I think it was the how. It was almost like a blanket statement. Everyone should go and raise capital to this extent, right? And there was that conversation around retained earnings. Does it qualify as capital? And the question was, why not? Not every bank is having capital issues, right? It's almost like how I think about AMCON, right? Is that every bank now has to drop a percentage of their total assets and contribute towards AMCON, right? Now the thing is, I have a clean bank and I have low NPLs, but I have a big balance sheet. So my contribution to AMCON is significantly higher than maybe a tier 3 bank that has maybe 40% NPL, but has a small asset base. So essentially, I'm being punished, or my balance sheet is funding AMCON to help banks who actually created the problem. So there's that first question, right? The second question was, why don't we look at the retained earnings and say what portion of it is actually cash and can be capitalized and used and we can upscale it to the share capital, as opposed to, because what essentially happened with central bank was like, we're not going to qualify your retained earnings and capitalize it into your shareholders fund. So go and raise fresh money, right? And the question was, even when these banks raise this money, will they actually lend it? Is the question.
So I would come back to you on 2 or 3 things. So the first one around AMCON is that actually we should probably, and I'm probably going to get into trouble for this, but we should probably not have tier 3 banks, right? So we should probably, if you recall, when bank capitalization happened the first time under Soludo, there were give or take 90 banks, and we came down to 20 something. Yeah. And so I think if there was that kind of triage, then your question about AMCON would kind of just go away in the wash, right? Because it would be kind of all the big banks funding AMCON, for their own thing. So I think that's one thing. Secondly, you're getting into the details, which I'm not looking at. So yeah, you can argue whether it should be retained. Oh, sorry. The other point I wanted to make about the previous recapitalization is that, yeah, during that recapitalization, there were banks that were, very well capitalized for where they were. So if you remember, Atedo Peter's side, when it came out, was arguing very voraciously against it.
Yeah, he was.
Because Stanbic, I think, had a very good capital ratio. They didn't feel they needed the money, etc. But what happened was that when the capital was increased, it actually opened. It was almost like, you're standing on, the ground floor, looking at VI, right? And you see something, and then somebody takes you to the top of that building that has Cali in it, and you're now looking at VI from a different. So all of a sudden they found out, with all this capital we can do so much more. And we certainly found that Nigerian banks were participating in not in the sort of same way, but were able to participate in many of the deals that we were doing in AFC. Which they wouldn't have been able to do. So again, I think that taking us from where we are to where they're talking about, even if the capital adequacy ratios of some of the banks are fine, increasing the capital will open up other vistas of things that they can do that they just couldn't even dream of doing before. The final point about lending, I think, is a multifaceted question. And you can blame the banks, right? And there's probably some blame that goes to the banks. But quite honestly, the system does not support lending.
Yeah.
Both the macros, when inflation is 24%, what rate are you going to lend at and make a spread, right? When, collecting debt, I've been on the board of one of the Fugas banks, and I'm currently on the board of, one in the UK subsidiary. So I've seen some of these things from the inside. You have people who defraud you and then take you to court and win.
Incredible.
Collecting debt is not easy. I mean, there's some of these people, and very big names I won't mention, will come and say, well, I'm not paying you. Do your worst.
Do what you want to do.
And the legal system doesn't back you up, right? Or at least you're in court for ages. It's kind of random whether the judge, they'll come and say, that it wasn't a real debt because, you lend them money, the money went there. Then they'll take you to court and say, it wasn't a real debt. And the judge will agree, or, whatever, So it's a multifaceted problem. And quite honestly, if as somebody in the country, you like to see more bank lending and stuff. But if you actually sit down and look at it objectively and you're a bank, why would you be lending?
So the question is, so why should you be raising capital? Because what's going to happen is
but
all the banks will move to Eco-Atlantic with.
But the second, the second point though is that the banks will not lend if they don't have the capital. So you've got to start somewhere.
Yeah, it's chicken and egg. So you got to have the capital.
You've got to start somewhere. So look, I mean, everything has its sides. So I mean, I think most people would generally agree that the recapitalization in 2005 was on balance good, but the reason we have AMCON is because of that recapitalization, because the banks, had a lot of capital they didn't know what to do with, and they put it into all kinds of rubbish. So everything has its downsides as well. But I think if you don't, nothing ventured, nothing gained. If you just say, okay, it's a problem, but you don't take any steps, then nothing is going to change. Now, I think one of the things, and this is a generalization, is in Nigeria is that we often start things and don't take them to their logical conclusion. So what I would like to see is more reforms around some of the things that we've mentioned as well, which would also help banks. And, it's one of those like paradoxes that, you bring in these laws that are borrower friendly, thinking that it will make, things nicer for people who are borrowing. But in the end, what it does is it just puts people off from borrowing because, there are two sides to every equation, sort of like landlords and tenants. If you bring in laws that are too favorable to tenants, then people just won't put their properties on the market and, rents and everything go up. It's more difficult to find good properties. On the other hand, you don't want to make things too, you don't want to have the tenants not have any protection as well, because, clearly not all landlords are nice people, and some will, shaft their tenants. So you've got to find the right balance. But I think in terms of being able to enforce debts and things, it's I think we're probably on the wrong side of that balance. But there are other things, as I said, the macro thing, you need to bring down inflation, for example, other things like that.
And even on the macro side as well, to add, I always make this joke, if Treasury, 1 year Treasury is at 28 to 9% yield, and Daily comes to me to lend to his business, no one is going to fire me if I lend to the government.
Yeah.
But if I lend to Daily,
then
I lose my job, right?
Exactly.
And then also, if 1 year, if interest rates are 27, 28%, the 1 year Treasury is at 20 whatever percent, how much do I lend to Daily? How much does Daily need to be making for me to pay me back?
I think we talked about it last week, that it's almost like equity investment.
Yeah. So the whole system has to come down.
No, I agree.
Right? The whole system has to come
so
down.
if in, and I mean, it wasn't like a million years ago that inflation was 8%, right? So if inflation is 8%, like 8-9%, right? Then you can, government will be borrowing at 6-7%. You know, Dele can be borrowing from you at
15,
12, 13, 15, which is doable in this market. You know?
I have borrowed at 12% before.
Yeah. So
You're aged.
yeah.
Just like 4 or 5 years ago.
A long time
man.
ago.
No, 5 years ago.
So I mean, inflation is really a very insidious thing in our economy.
I hate it.
and it's not something that people people focus on the value of the naira, but actually, frankly, if we focus more on the inflation rate, I think we would have better long-term outcomes.
All right, fantastic conversation so far. My God, this has almost been like business school. Sitting with Drew Ali here. Of course, guys, this is Drinks and Mics. Most of the drinks here, courtesy of our, sponsor, Lead Drop, and we do not, of course, promote excessive drinking of alcohol. As you can see, some of us are drinking water, some of us are drinking juice. I don't know what Otumba is drinking, but I know what Arnold is drinking. So I'm drinking water.
But it's great that we're all 4 members of Speakeasy Club.
Yeah.
Around the table.
Of course, courtesy Speakeasy, who also have relationships with Lead Drop. By the way, I'm sure you probably noticed some books here. We still have books to deliver to the winners 2 episodes ago of Shoyombo's book, Vantage. So please, if you haven't contacted the team, do contact us so that we can have those books delivered to you. And right in front as well is another book, proudly written by me. So this is a collection of corporate stories that I used to tweet about a lot, so kind of turned it into a book, and this is volume 1. Currently writing volume 2. So again, we're going to be announcing giving this out at some point, next few episodes, probably on a live show that we're planning sometime in July. At this point, we segue into buy, sell, or hold. I've got a number of buy, sell, or hold questions just to give Andre a little bit of what buy, sell, or hold. So buy, sell, or hold is basically buy means yes, I think this will work, or I agree. Sell is no, I don't. Then of course hold is your neutral, so you don't have a chance to say you're neutral for some of these questions. So I'm going to start with Otumba. I kind of feel I know which
Otumba are you starting with?
The real one. The real one.
Which Otumba? The one to your left?
God, just this weekend that he's gone to. Anyway,
did you ride a horse?
No, I wish.
He didn't though. Good question. Ask me if he really stayed. Whether he was in the bar somewhere.
Mr. Steve.
With the man of Steve.
He was my classmate in secondary school.
Seriously? Oh wow.
Interesting. Small. We're gonna bring him on Drinks and Mics very soon. That's one of
you should. He's a great guy.
Yeah, he is. He really is.
Yeah, the man of Steve, you're here, and we're dragging you to
bringing you on
to Drinks and Mics very soon. Gonna start with you, even though I kind of feel I know what some of the things you're gonna say, but maybe shock me here. So the first one, I know your answer, but let me ask again for the records. Debt default. You said Nigeria is going to default by 2030, all right, or 2031. Even though I don't know why you said 30 or 31. Buy, sell, or hold, and why?
I think we keep on this trajectory. Again, I don't think that the upside to revenues are significant, or we're not growing revenues as fast as debt. I think the risk is extremely high. So I think that.
So you buy?
I'm gonna buy. The probability that, and that's why it's hard to, as much as you want to buy equities, that is the, which is what Andrew said. Andrew did say that. No, because at the end of the day, if I buy a stock, I want it to appreciate, right? But if the currency devalues, I lose. In USD value, I'm losing that money, right?
But you're investing in Naira, aren't you?
Yeah, but
so isn't this a bet for buying equities than buying fixed
the one thing I look at
income
is this. When I look at it, you're the middle class. You're middle to rich, right?
Lower middle class.
Everything you're wearing is FX related.
Are you sure?
Mostly, right?
Oh, okay.
Everything you use, your car, your lifestyle, is
Local.
mostly FX related. Even the t-shirts are probably imported, right? So at the end of the day, you need to think about, and I think, and the truth is that, someone asked me a question the other day, is what would you have done differently in your life? And I said I would save 40% of my income in FX from the day I was a graduate entry. That would have been one thing I would have done, right? Because the truth is, as long as you're an emerging economy, your currency will devalue. If you go and look at every emerging economy,
Average 5-7%.
Unfortunately, I think even the US currency is going to also devalue as well. So the question is,
you wanna switch to gold like Arnold?
I'll probably do Swiss francs. I'll probably do 6 francs or something.
Yeah.
But I do think that I think that the risk of default in Nigeria is high.
Arnold?
So,
are you buying this or you're selling it?
So the thing is, I understand where Dale is coming from. If we do continue the trajectory that we are going in terms of ramping up debts, right? Ramping up debts, and to get more debts, we have to increase our cost of funding. I have that same worry that we might go into defaults. I don't think defaults is. Having been in Ghana, being in Zambia when Zambia defaulted, Ghana when Ghana defaulted, you realize that it's possible and it's feasible. I don't think we're far off.
We never defaulted under Abacha, never defaulted under Babangida, not even under Buhari.
We had debt forgiveness. Remember we went through a period of debt forgiveness. So this
we did default under those people, yes. So we didn't have Euro bonds at the time. We only started doing Euro bonds whenever in the 2000s, right?
Yeah.
But we were perennial defaulters
the Paris Club
during the
history there. That's why they came in.
Yeah.
So I think it's possible. So it's a buyish hold.
Whatever that means.
Yeah, so it's a buy short. I think it's possible that, and also the thing is, I struggle to see how we will get out of this borrowing, because we seem to have an issue with reducing capex, right? So it's a buy short. I think it's possible. I can't give a figure to when. Maybe I need to do the work to see when we have the biggest payments of principal and coupon. I think there's a balloon payment somewhere. But I think 2 years. But
isn't all these tax reforms you're seeing one of the reasons why we're trying to
increase revenue through taxes,
mitigate some of this risk down the line? I don't know.
Yeah, I still don't think it's enough.
I don't think that tax should be your cardinal.
I mean, you got to
pay debt for growing.
And we're trying to come for this 21 point something billion. That takes us about 60% of our spending. In terms of debt. So if we get this 21,
we're not taking it in one blow. We're taking it in
but it's still going to add up. It's still going to add up to about 60% of our spending, right? So this in terms of debt servicing. So I think that I think it's possible. I don't think we're far off. I really don't think we're far off.
So I'm a hold. As I said earlier, if we hadn't done the subsidy removal and the devaluation, we were heading into like a default in like a year or two's time from now. So we've put it off, but as the other guys have said, we can still get there. I'm not sure that we definitively have to get there, but we can, and if we're careless, we will. So I'm a hold on it. I mean, it's something I think we need to watch very carefully.
Yeah.
Just on the point of taxes, one of the things with the tax reform is that, which, is fine, but we keep on essentially taxing the same people.
Yeah.
Now, if you think about it, right, people say, I don't know what the number is, but 30 to 50% of Nigeria's economy is informal, right?
50 actually.
Yeah, so we're not really taxing half of our economy, so I think that's one thing. So, sort of following a kind of Western taxing method, income tax, corporate tax is fine, increasing the rates, I guess it's okay, but you're essentially just going back and squeezing the same people.
But is there any option? Is there a different kind of?
Yeah, I mean, so you have like
people?
Ghana. Ghana, for example, do this Momo tax, this e-levy. where to them, because they realize a lot of the business.
Don't we do that too, like electronic levy and all that? Isn't that something they introduced?
Yeah,
That
well,
exists.
I don't know, but we need to think about those things. So things like VAT. I mean, no, who pays VAT even? I mean, is everybody paying VAT? I mean, I'm sure, the restaurants that you guys go to, they pay VAT, but the Mama Puts and Co are not. And if you go to other countries, right, they have been able to extend the tax system into much more of the informal economy. Go to Rwanda, go to, places, even Ghana.
How are they doing it?
Well, look, we have all these ID cards and things. So that's where you start with, that's how you start. And, you really build up this sort of e-economy, and you know where everybody is, you know how much they're earning, and then you start to charge taxes on them. And, with all these things, you just have to start. If you're not even starting, that's the point about the capital as well. If you don't even start, you're not going to succeed. So you've got to start. But if you just kind of try and squeeze more and more out of the same people, you're not really going to increase your revenues very much. And the other thing, obviously, is that, which is a bit of a circular argument, but you've got to grow your economy, because if people are richer, then they'll be able to pay more.
tax. Exactly.
So, anyway.
All right, let's go to the next buy, sell, or hold. Otoma, I'm coming back to you. We've seen a lot of reforms from the CBN, particularly, but they've held rates now stable since November. Next MPC is, I guess, a month away or so. Inflation is one sticky thing. We've talked about inflation all through today. Do you see inflation coming down to single digits by 2027? Buy, sell, or hold. Inflation coming down to single
2027.
digits 2027.
Single.
Yeah.
Not going to happen.
Not going to happen. Despite the rebasing.
2027?
Yeah.
I mean, I fundamentally have a problem with the rebasing, anyways. But I just don't see it. I think you could come to the teens, but I don't think single digits is achievable.
Wow. I don't.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we probably...
So that's a sell for you.
That's a sell, right? Yeah. Okay. So 2027, I think we get into the 19s, 2026. 2020... End of 2025, 2026. I do think rest of this rebase, I think December inflation is going to be a weird spike. So the rebase sort of throws me off a little bit. But I do think we go into the teens in the late teens, Q1, Q2, 2026.
Is that because of base effects or?
Because of base effects.
Yeah.
Because of base effects. So I'm trying to work base effects through. So single digits 2027. It's tough, but I think maybe low teens, end of 2020, end of 2026. But 2027 is quite hard for me to call. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
So are you selling or holding?
Hold.
You hold.
I hold.
Andrew?
Yeah.
Sell.
Sell.
Without question. First of all,
There's just a lot of headwinds.
First of all, inflation is fundamentally, today at least, is fundamentally a fiscal problem, not a monetary problem. And we've been talking about expenditure.
So why are we using monetary policy to fight it then?
Well, I mean, I guess if you're the central bank governor, you've
That's
got to
the-
You have to
use
do,
Well,
that's do your
you
job.
Yeah, you've got to use the tools that you have, right? As we continue to have large budget deficits, that I think, as I mentioned, I think is one of the primary drivers of inflation. And, I don't think there's anything, I don't know, I don't follow the numbers as closely as you guys do, but I don't see that spending is coming down.
No.
And I don't see that revenue, we never meet our revenue targets. And even if you look at the budget as proposed, and, I don't think that the 26 and 27 budgets will get better for one reason I'm coming to in a second. If you look at the budget, even as proposed, i.e. if we get the revenues, it's kind of looking scary. As I said, it's kind of a 50% deficit. And we won't get the revenues because we never do. And then we've got an election in 27.
Of course, yes, we do.
So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Ooh.
spending is not
Spending
going
is gonna
down.
go.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Are you changing from who?
No, I'm still. I'm
It's a strong sell.
You're switching to a strong sell. Interestingly, for me as well, it's a sell, because I kind of think that we are currently in a period where I think things are really looking up.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, because I mean, if you've followed the global economy for years, you know that it's always a cycle. I kind of think we're in a cycle where things seem okay and there's still a lot of headwinds coming down the road, and I feel like we probably might not be prepared enough for that. And so 2027 could be one of those years where we would face significant headwinds, and for that reason, I think inflation will be
Inflation
sticky.
spikes again.
Yeah, it would be
I think it
sticky.
spikes, so it's
It would spike. It will be
Spike.
sticky. It probably won't spike, but definitely not single digits. Just no matter how much they want to play with those numbers, it's going to be very difficult to get single digits. For me. All right. Of course, for default, I'm buying. I don't think that we're going to default. I don't think we're going to default. So next is Andrew did talk about equities in 2014 and now, and it's almost like, you know what, if you had exited 10 years ago, you're probably better off. Okay, that's hindsight. So we're looking at the future now, and some would say, look, betting on equities now that we have a semblance of a free market, or floating exchange rate or something close to that, equities will outperform dollar investment 10 years from now. Buy, sell, or hold. You can sell all through so far.
So I think 10 years is a bit far.
That's Naira equities, that is.
Yeah, I mean 10 years is a bit far because there's going to be a change in who the president will be. So I guess I can't think that far. But I think Naira.
Assuming everything remains the same.
I think Naira will outperform US. And I think
Naira perform US.
Naira returns.
Naira returns. Okay.
will outperform the US returns. And I think if you look at, I did one article many years ago, not a few years ago, where there was this 10-year challenge that the judges were doing, where, what did you look like 10 years ago and what do you look like now? So I did something similar for the stock market, where I did where the stock price was 10 years ago and where it is now, and I adjusted for inflation and FX movements. And the only three stocks that outperformed inflation and FX was Okomu Presco and Nestle. The next sort of two stocks were Stanbic and GT Bank at the time. So I do think that I think Naira would outperform.
I don't understand the logic, because you said you went back 10 years.
No.
and only
It's an old article I wrote.
Yeah, and only 4 stocks.
Yeah, so
Only 4 stocks outperformed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what makes you think that would change?
So why will...
No, because I think the USD is going to devalue. I think the US currency is going to devalue. So for that reason,
Yeah, I mean, I think
Naira will do better.
dollar
The producer is shaking his head. Doesn't agree with you.
No, but
So-
the US currency is going to devalue.
So I mean, there's a couple of points there. I agree. I think dollar. Dollar's about to blow up. There's a US debt crisis coming. That's another show for another conversation. We're already seeing it, right? We're seeing US Treasury. Okay, we're seeing dollar get weaker. I think dollar continues to get weaker. Against the Naira, I still think Naira gets weaker against dollar, right? But I think 10 years is hard, but 24 months to 60 months, 24 months to 5 years, I think choice equities.
10 years is what I said. I know you.
10 years is difficult.
I don't know how to
10 years
is very difficult.
10 years. That's why you're on the spot.
Because
10
the
years.
problem we are now is the
project.
volatile, is the
Then say
craziness that
sell
comes
or
in.
hold.
So I've been
Let's
looking
put me on
at
the spot. But I think that there are equities, there are assets that will outperform the Naira depreciation over the next 24 to 60
I'm
months.
talking about an equity portfolio. Even if it's
equity
two
portfolio,
assets, that's fine.
I've been looking at some data on the stock on the NGX that suggests that international investors are beginning to come back.
I mean, like Andrew
Maybe
said,
no- maybe
that's
not-
what they
maybe
say,
not-
and then they,
no.
and then they are.
We're fully committed.
Maybe not in the way, in the manner that we want, in the, but the data does suggest that international flows are beginning to come back into the
Yeah,
market.
and also
I
don't-
think that will support a strong Naira rally or a strong stock market
I mean,
rally.
but recent
also
recent NGX data also suggests about 80% of we had 80% outflows. Some people would say it's because of dividend payment and all that. Anyway, but I mean that's
But also don't forget there's some stocks that are actually there's some companies in the stock market that found a way to diversify their revenue streams, right? Like the agri businesses, they'll come with Presco, and they continue to increase their dollar leg, which you've seen when you look at the share price, you've seen the depreciation of the stock. Almost regardless of depreciation of the naira.
Yeah.
So those sort of stocks, those will come with Presco, they'll outperform.
So what are you doing? Buy, sell, or hold?
Buying.
You're buying. So you
yeah.
believe Naira
Yeah, I think over the next couple of years,
10?
Not 10 years.
10 is hard. 10 is
It's hard to call.
So are you guys holding or what?
I'm buying. Sorry, it's because of time.
So let me clarify your question. Are you talking about the market? Or are you talking about specific stocks? Because if you're talking about just buying like an index of the market, and will that outperform over 10 years? Or are you talking about, okay, if I chose the
Naira
right
assets
stocks,
generally. So a portfolio of Naira assets.
over 10 years?
Yeah.
If you had to push me, I'd say sell. I'm with Arnold, 3 years, sure. 10 years, when you go and look at historical track record.
But does this matter now that we have a free floating exchange rate?
Do we have
There's no longer something close
we
to
have a
that. There's no
free
longer
floating
fuel
rate?
subsidy. There's a lot of reforms.
So you recall that, and by the way, I'm not saying that this is the case, right? But you recall that when the naira was devalued under Emefiele from 200 to 350, we were told that it was a market-based rate, right?
Yeah, we were.
And then 1 year later, you look at the graph and it's flat.
It was flat, all true.
Now, as I said, I'm not saying that that's the case here, but there's a lot of pressure for because of what I said earlier, that we tend to judge how well the economy is doing based on how stable the exchange rate is, regardless of all the factors that mean that it shouldn't be stable. So there's a lot of pressure to prop it up. And that propping it up leads to cycles. And, we've seen this where every 5 to 7 years, there's a devaluation, right? And, it would obviously be far better, actually, if it were floating and if it were allowed to come down gradually rather than
have that
crash.
steep one. Yeah.
And I hope that this time is different. And, as I said, there's nothing to, it's very early days. And, that would be the best policy. But history has shown that it's very hard to sustain those kind of free-floating type of policies in this country. And so, again, we talk about inflation, which I think we're not doing the fundamentals of taking away what is causing inflation.
Structural issues.
So with all those things, if you look at it in the long run, sitting here today, there's nothing to tell me that things have really fundamentally changed. Now, they might have, and maybe I'm being over pessimistic, but again, we haven't. What's the expression they use? We've had several rodeos before. And they've kind of all ended in one way. So if you force me to bet, I will have to kind of bet with history. Now, again, this is not to say that, things
aren't
changing. And, there have been some real reforms. I mean, the fuel subsidy was something that has not been successful before, even though virtually every government comes to the fact that they need to remove that. Now, of course, what you do with the gains from that is you can remove it, but then you've got to sort of make sure you're using the gains
in the right way,
in a prudent way. So we have to see. So I'm just going with what has happened historically, and on a 10-year view, we're likely to have a devaluation event based on history, and that is likely to erode returns. On a shorter time frame, that's not likely to happen, and I guess that's why Arnold is trying to say I'll have Naira assets for 3 to 5 years. So
I'm trying to hide myself here, but for me, it's a sell as well.
Yeah.
To Arnold's point as well, for Naira to really for dollar asset to be better than Naira, would have to see the exchange rate devalue to about 2,000 Naira for that to beat a Naira return of about 20-25%. You can run the math yourself. Last buy sell because we're really out of time. I can't believe time has flown like this. It's incredible. Last buy sell and quickly. Something that I really want to get your view on in terms of, we've talked about the economy in general. So this is now sectors. So probably not 10 years, 5 years from now, based on some of the reforms you're seeing, based on some of the things you're seeing happen globally, services as often led as the major sector in Nigeria. But which of the sectors are you buying, selling, or holding? Agric, industries, which of course is manufacturing, and then services. Are you buying all? Is there some you're buying, selling, or holding? Quickly.
I would buy banks.
No. Services.
Services industries.
Manufacturing.
Okay. I will buy manufacturing.
Really?
I think we need it.
All right, next 5
because
years.
I think we need it. Essentially because now that we need to, everyone's looking internally as to how, Trump is saying America first, right? We need to start thinking internally how is Nigeria first, made in Nigeria good. So I think manufacturing I would absolutely buy. I would buy the telecom industry.
Services.
I would buy services. Absolutely.
Agric? Don't you need to?
Agric, we need to. I really struggle with that space in terms of just, first of all, the security of the country. Also the flash floods that we,
and then our ability to distribute food.
And then, so in terms of Agric, I would rather invest in one of the value chains, which is from the farm to processing, is where I would probably. I don't know if I have what it takes to do the actual farming. I know that I would come out unscarred.
So you're selling or holding?
I would probably be a holder.
That's good. Buy, hold.
You know how I feel about this. So, I've always said if I ever get elected president, I will force a land reform and redistribute land. That's Agric.
Yeah, and that's
I'll
how
then
I would never
repress and force every bank to lend to manufacturing industries. So that's industries. So for me, Agric and industries, they, together we talked about this, the biggest GDP contributors, biggest labor as well, so job creation. So it's almost like my dream. I love my dream sectors, if I could, would be Agric and manufacturing. I like services now. I've got nothing wrong with services. But manufacturing and Agric for me. Industries and Agric, big ones for me. Big ones for me.
Andrew?
So it depends on how you define it, but I would buy both services and manufacturing and hold on Agric. So why I say it depends on how you define it is that frankly, we would struggle to develop serious manufacturing in the next 5 years. We have the people who are doing it. But
when you say manufacturing, that's the capacity.
We don't have the skills. We don't have the capital assets. We're not
technological
we're not really
patents.
Competitive. So, for example, I was just reading. My former employer, AFC, published a report on infrastructure, and they're talking about how yeah, okay, we're moving all to off-grid and solar, but that actually costs you twice as much as grid power if we did it properly. And, having cheap power is still an important input to manufacturing. So, there are many things that will impede being competitive, but it actually is something that we need because, again, manufacturing is one of those places where you can take relatively unskilled people and have them be productive. And again, improving income is really about improving productivity. And that's why I'm a hold on agriculture, because agriculture in terms of farming, employs people, but it's very low value added. The returns on agriculture are very low. And the countries that have really progressed in agriculture have done so actually by kicking people away and moving to being more, what's the right word, industrialized. So, America, it's a big agricultural country. Most of the exports to China are actually agricultural products. But today you have one person, where you doing the same amount of production of wheat that maybe you had like 300 or 500 people doing 100 years ago. So you can only really improve in agriculture by actually getting rid of people and mechanizing it and making it more industrial, right? And so that's why I'm not big on agriculture. Actually, and agriculture is used in this country as a way that people, you go to, well, it's changed now, but when I sort of used to go to India, you had like people who were really poor and really starving and everything. We don't have so much of that in Nigeria because people can go and do agriculture and at least find some sort of subsistence. But it's all subsistence. It's not about developing. So agriculture, you need to industrialize it. There are value-add opportunities in the kind of value chains of it, so manufacturing stuff with the agricultural produce. So I don't know if that falls under under manufacturing.
Exactly.
And services, I mean, look, we've got a lot of people. And we will need a lot of services. I think also, and it's one of the areas I'm working on, one of the things we can do is export our people through, outsourcing and that kind of thing. So I think that's a big potential opportunity for us. I mean, we can't have millions of people japping, but we can have millions of people actually working like they do in India, like they do in the Philippines, selling their services offshore. Yes, AI is going to eat some of that, but it's not going to eat everything overnight. And so I think that's a huge potential opportunity. So I agree with the people who are trying to push that. So I do see services as also a big thing.
Okay.
So.
All right. So for me, I think mine is pretty simple. I buy agriculture, I buy manufacturing, industrial. I'm kind of holding services, not because I'm in a negative on services. I think that services is one area that we sort of have matured in Nigeria. We probably just need to be a lot more modern and access more foreign markets, like you mentioned. Whether it's servicing, I mean, we're in a very beautiful time zone. Beautiful, like Trump says, in a beautiful time zone. We speak English as well. And so we could actually export a lot of our services outside. And we have a lot of young people as well. So I think services is one area that probably don't even need government intervention there as much as you do in agriculture and manufacturing. All right, guys, it's been 2 hours plus. My God, I hope I'm not mistaken, but this is one of the longest drinks.
I think it's the longest.
It was meant to be just an hour, but it's just amazing having Andrade here with us. I mean, this has almost been like a superb lecture. And I hope you guys have soaked in a lot as much as we have done here in the studio. It's been super amazing. And of course, we'd like to have your comments and feedback. Let us know if you're buy, selling, or holding Andrew. I'm buying. I don't know about you guys. It's whether you can afford to have him back. But I'm just buying. Are you buying?
Strong buy.
Strong buy.
Strong buy.
Strong
All
buy.
right.
I don't stay on hold. I'm not a hold guy.
Yeah, so we're good to get your comments as well. Of course, this has been Drinks and Mics brought to you by Nairametrics. Do subscribe. We do this every Friday, 6 p.m. We go live. And then every week as well. Next week, we're bringing in somebody else as well, someone very interesting, probably very into a different area of the economy as well, as we try to make thought leadership more mainstream in Nigeria. Of course, for those of you who won any of our giveaway prizes, like I mentioned earlier, do please contact the team so that you can get your prizes and get your books as well. Andrew did mention a lot of books that he's read, so we're probably going to get him to give us some of those books so that we can share as well in the comment section. And if you want to read books, very important that you read some of his books as well.
Maybe we should do a reading list.
Yeah, I'll probably create a reading list because I think a lot of the guys on Drinks and Mics also read a whole lot of books. You want to educate yourself. One of the best things you can do is really read books. It's just an incredible way of learning a lot of stuff. Thank you so much for listening. And until we'll do this again next week, do have a profitable week ahead. And cheers, everyone. Cheers.
My water.
Did this switch to water? 1.0. Thank you. All right, that's our sign off. Bye.
All right.